50% of the market. There you go. You need to have 50% of the market value. So be careful, my friend. The market value here is on the second line. So you got short accounts, which are kind of a little different than the long account, right? The long account, remember, the classical margin equation is long market value minus debit equals equity. So this was a little different in terms of what we call our setup. We're doing a mark right now. And I say, okay, so you can only need to be at risk for 32.5. 32.5. So again, here is where we're getting that number, right? And then we said, you are at risk for 32.5 and you only need to be at risk for, looks like I jam myself up here on my return button. 22.5 is what you have in excess. That's how much you're over 50%, right? And so that's called your excess. And we said that for test purposes. I don't think that'll be a big deal that you need to know that's a thing. And 2 times that is your selling power. Now, I don't want to go too much in the weeds with you, but if we did that, right? So if I sent you 22.5 right now, that would come out of that credit balance, right? So if I send you 22.5, which I'm happy to do, that comes out of the 120. And then if you use your selling power, the 45 grand is going to go against that short market value. You'd have 110,000 in short market value if you did that. And then you collect another 45 grand. Any questions on this one? Yeah.
Yeah. Just a question. They've had scenarios where they say that they received a margin call. And they weren't at Reg T at 50%.
Yeah. So you have another one coming, but we could just do it more than once. So very testable. I think this is more testable than this question, but at all times you got to have 30% of the market value. That's what we call minimum maintenance. And so you say, well, Dean, how far down could it go before I would have a problem? Right? That's a different question, by the way. So be careful what you're being asked. What I mean by that is, if I ask you what is minimum maintenance on this account right now, we would times this by 30%.
Okay.
And, that's a different question than market value maintenance. So, I have a mantra, RTFQ. Make sure you read the full question and you're answering what you're being asked and not what you think you're being asked. So if I ask you what is maintenance on this account, it's 30% of 65. But if I ask you market value at maintenance, that's different. I'm asking how far up it could go before there'd be a problem. The way we do that is we take the credit and we divide by 1.3.
So market value. Okay.
Yeah. And so if we do that, let's just do that one here. Let's just make our note here.
So it would say something like, what is the market value for
market value and maintenance? Yeah, that's what they would say. So in our example, we would take 120,000. We would divide by 1.3. And that's how far up this account could go. So I'm going to take my 120,000. I'm going to divide by 1.3. And this stock could go to $92,307 before we would have a problem. 307. I think you have one here in your punch list that we're going to do it, and it asked you that.
Okay.
So remember, that's a different question than what you were asked here. Here, the question was, what is the selling power? Now, my guess is past perfect. I'm not a big fan, but past perfect is, I think what they're trying to get you to understand is this idea of how to do a setup and then how to do a mark, right? So I think in big picture wise, here's what I think they're trying to illustrate is, can you do the initial setup and then can you do the mark, right? So, I'm not being facetious, but I was talking to a very senior person at a competitor of Past Perfect, and I said that the sales team at Past Perfect deserves a bonus because somehow they've convinced firms that there's something to be said for tormenting, students on this kind of stuff, when really, it's not as big a deal on the test as most people think. Now, what I mean by that is, there's 3 or 4 margin questions, but my God, Past Perfect turns you into a margin clerk. I mean, to answer these questions. And I know some firms, I hope yours is not one of them, they won't even let people move on in the units of past perfect until they've got like a 90 on, the margin. And, who knows, you might get stuck forever there because they're just so kind of obtuse. All right. So any questions on this one before we do number 2?
No.
Okay. So number 2. So let's clear our screen. So moving forward, what's our takeaway? Our takeaway is when we get a margin question, we want to know the classical margin equation because we need to be able to do an initial setup and a mark to market. So, we just can't jump in. So it looks like very similar to the last one. A customer sells short 1,000 shares at 60. So again, we're going to do our initial setup. Let me get my text thing here. So we're getting $60,000 from selling the borrowed stock. And then remember, Reg T says the customer has to initially deposit how much of that?
30,000.
Right on, right? And so that's going to be your margin call. And by the way, that could have been the question again. So you just got to be really careful, about what you're being asked. And, here it doesn't, I might even recommend, I probably should think about this before I say it out loud. I almost think I would probably just do my initial setup before I even look at the question to see what they're asking me, because who knows what they're asking me. But, here, this is where most people get jammed up on a short account. They don't know where that credit register is coming from. And where the credit register is coming from, what you got from selling the borrowed stock, plus what you had to put with it, right?
Yeah,
So you're going to have $90,000.
Purchase plus Reg T.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So now the securities you owe. So in a long account, what you owe is money. But in a short account, what you owe are securities. And right now, the securities you owe,
60.
right on. And we said that really is important. What we're working on here is the classical margin equation. What I mean by classical is we just assume everybody knows it, right? So, I mean, the margin department thinks when they reach out to you, by the way, margin department does most of this, but, the test assumes that you should have a general understanding when the margin department calls you and says, hey, where's your customer's money or what's going on? And so this is our equity. And
30.
now we've accomplished our initial setup. Okay, so boom. And again, I would, as your tutor, want you to know the classical margin equation, right? The credit register minus short market value equals equity. Okay, let's see what's next in the question. So we've done our initial setup. So this says as an initial transaction and a new short margin. Oh, I'm sorry. 1A. You got 1 and 1A. Okay, so 1A. A customer sells short 1,060 in a margin account, regular way settlement. 2 days after the trade, the stock has dropped to 40. Ooh. So it says customer sells shorts in a margin account. So one thing I want to make sure is we don't read too much into the question. So what I mean by that is I'm thinking, well, did the guy pay for the stock? There's nothing in here that told me he didn't make his required deposit. But I'm kind of like thinking, well, gee, why are they telling me regular way settlement is T+2? I mean, I know that, but I mean, so that looks like, maybe they're baiting me into something. 2 days after the trade. So remember what we're going to do now?
Yeah,
We're
so
gonna do
what we're going to do,
a mark to market, right? So
yeah.
what doesn't change is the $90,000.
So keep your credit the same.
Yeah, the cash
And
is still the cash. The cash doesn't go anywhere until you do something. And so that's our credit register. But now, hey, if we went in the open market and bought back the borrowed stock and gave it back to the person we borrowed it from, it would only cost us, it says 40. So that would be $40,000. So that sounds bueno because we wanted to go down. It looks like so far that's everything's going according to plan. And so now we have 50,000 in equity. Boom. Let's put that there. Now again, RRTFQ, we got to be real careful what they're asking us. Right. So, this is again our mark to market. And let's see what they want to know. By the way, we could practice if we want. We could see what the excess equity is, whatever that is. But it says the minimum maintenance margin requirement is. So they didn't ask us market value of maintenance. They just asked us the minimum, and the minimum is 30% of the market value. So 30%, I think, is 12. Is that what that is?
That is correct.
So that is our minimum maintenance in this account.
So now if they stated, what is the market value?
Yeah, then it would
Or
be the
every-
credit by 1.3. That'd be a different question, your point. That would be a different question. And that would be 90,000 divided by 1.3 if it asks what is market value of maintenance. Those are different things, right? So asking you what is minimum maintenance and asking you what is market value at maintenance are different questions, right? Now, as you typed it to me, it didn't ask us market value maintenance, it said minimum maintenance, right? Didn't ask us market value maintenance. If it was said market value maintenance, that would be the 90 by 1.3. By the way, since we have it up here though, what are your other questions? Like we could have asked you, like we did last time, we could have asked you like, what is excess SMA? And so we would compare what you have to Reg T, right? And you have 25,000 in excess, and you could either have that as cash, or if you don't want to have it as cash, tell you what we'll do. We'll make a special memorandum to your account that you had that today. So, lots of things they could ask you. Yep.
Would Reg T be 20?
Oh, my bad. I did that on purpose just to see if you were paying attention.
That's okay.
There you go. You're correct. So that would be 20. Look at you correcting the tutor. Right on. By the way, the other reason I joke about this all the time, but it's not really a joke. You also want to have a process, because if you have a process, you're more likely to catch yourself messing up. So I can't tell you like how much time somebody will watch me on a video and I've made a mistake. And before they give me 10 seconds to find that I can correct myself, they're sitting and asking, oh, you messed up on a question. I said, well, if you have a process, eventually, you'll be better at catching yourself when you're making a mistake rather than, it doesn't have to be my process. If you want to have a process. So the process I'm recommending is that when we get margin questions, we do the initial setup and we do a mark to market. And to do the initial setup and the mark to market, we got to know the classical margin equation. So for long accounts, it's long market value minus debit equals equity. For short, it's credit register. And again, sometimes that's given information, sometimes it's not. But in these two first problems, Jan, we had to work for that. In other words, they didn't tell us the credit register. We had to figure that out on our own. So, I think that's these are more difficult than I think you're going to see on the test. Okay, any more questions on this one before we move on to 2? So this was 1A.
We're good.
All right, so let's go on to our next one. So if we're getting the hang of this, like I told you, as a tutor, I'm always glad when you're messed up on one thing, because if it's one thing we can fix, right? So hopefully you feel more comfortable. But again, number 2 says, and again, you're consistent. What I love about that is that, these are so far, all these are short accounts. Right. So it's a common thing. It's not like you're all over the place. It's like you're missing this. Okay. So an initial transaction in a new margin account, we sell short 1,000 shares at 20. All right. So let's get going on that. So from selling the borrowed stock, we're going to get $20,000. So let's put that there. And then we're going to have to put how much of our own money up?
10,000.
Right on. So that's going to be our Reg T requirement. And so that means we're going to have $30,000 in the credit register. Cash.
30,000.
Right. 20 grand from selling the borrowed stock. Plus now notice why I haven't gone back to the question yet, because I'm kind of following what I kind of was wanting you to do, which is do a setup before we even look at anything they want to know. I mean, why not get our setup done before we start messing around with whatever it is they're going to ask us. And so now we have accomplished our initial setup.
Mhm.
And again, as I said, the biggest thing, if you plan on being able to do this, is knowing the classical margin equation short. The classical margin equation short is credit register minus short market value equals equity. So we said that if you're going to be able to do this, you want to be able to do that formula. That formula is, the key. Okay, so now I don't do the whole thing on the 50% because we're perfectly balanced. So I'm not going to take like half of the 20. What I'm going to do now is see if we're going to have to do a mark, or maybe they just ask me something based on this. So now it's time to now that we're kind of oriented, we've done our initial setup. Now we want to go back and kind of see what's next for the question. All right, so the next part of the question says, in initial transaction, a new short margin account, a customer sells short 1,000 shares at 20. The stock then rises to 23. So now what we're going to do is a mark to market, right? So we're going to do a mark to market. You said this last time. Let's see if it's still there. You said that the credit register is not going to change. You're absolutely correct, right? There's still $30,000 in this account. What has changed is the value of the securities that you owe. That's what has changed. So there's our.
Because I think, was it the next step is we're selling?
Yeah, we're just doing the mark based on 23. It says the stock then rises to 23. So before I do anything, I'm just doing a mark. I don't know what the next thing is. I'll read it to us when we get there. But it says it goes to 23. So I want to recognize that is the incorrect direction, right? That is not bueno, right? Because I don't want the stock to go up. I want the stock to go down.
7.
And so please note, we've lost $3,000. And the reason we have lost $3,000 because it's going the wrong direction. If we went into the open market and bought back the borrowed stock, I'm not suggesting we do that, but we'd only have $7,000 left over. And please recall, we started with 10 in equity. So this is not so far, not so good. So that's called our mark. So we did a mark. Let's put that there. And so now your point, we'll go back and see based on this thing, what comes next. Okay, so it says, after the market rise, the customer's equity account is. So the equity in account is
7.
Yeah. So once again, we did our setup, we did our mark, and then, they're usually, this is pretty typical, right? They're asking us based on this move, what did it? So we, again, the process is we did our initial setup, we did our mark. By the way, this is restricted. You have less than 50% equity. We could have asked you what's maintenance, 30% at 23. We could have asked you what is market value at maintenance, credit by 1.3. So there's a lot of things we could have asked here. They just asked us the equity. By the way, this is the most reflective of the actual exam so far that we've worked at. This one, right? That other one, was pretty tough. All right. Any question on this one before we move on to our next one?
No.
Okay. Now, the next one, they are kind enough to give us the ledger entries. So your next one, they say a short margin account with the only position being 100 shares of ABC shows you the following. So, by the way, I'm, just because of the process, I don't want to just take their word for those ledger entries. I'm going to actually set the account up. Because, I got kind of like to look at it in my own scratch paper and not on the screen, right? So we're talking about how we're going to proceed. So I would have actually taken this thing off the screen and say, okay, I got a credit of 15,000. And, I believe in self-talk as well. What I mean by that is, I continually will say to myself, where did this 15 grand came from? It came from selling the stock I didn't own, the 100 shares of ABC, and then plus the money I had to put with it. And then it tells us the value of the security right now that I shorted is $10,000. So that's the short market value. And, we said that we want to know the classical margin equation, which is credit register minus short market value equals equity. And let's see, did they give that to us as well? Oh, they gave, but that was nice. They actually told us what this looks like, which is not normal that we would tell you exactly what the account looks like. Okay, so now remember that's borrowed stock you sold. You sold borrowed stock. So the guy you borrowed it from is expecting $1 dividend. Right. And so you got to make good on that dividend. So as the margin clerk, I call you in and I say, hey, Janet, the guy you borrowed the stock from is expecting his dividend, and the dividend didn't come to you. The dividend came to the person you sold the stock to. So this is one of the disadvantages of selling a stock that pays a dividend. You, the borrower, have to make the lender a whole for the dividend. And so you owe that guy $1 on how many shares did you borrow? 100 shares. So paid $1. And so as a margin clerk, I'm going to take that out of your cash. I'm going to say, well, Jana, we're going to have to pay this person that money. And that's where that $100 for the dividends is coming out of your credit register. Right? You see how I got that? It said it paid $1 dividend. And I had shorted 100 shares, and I got to give that to the person I borrowed it from. Remember, I borrowed the stock, and so I got to make that person whole on that dividend. Another tough one. This is another tough one. Do you see how I got that $100? So here it says,
yeah, for $1 per share.
yeah,
100 shares.
yeah. So here it says the short margin account with the only position 100 shares of ABC. So you borrowed 100 shares of ABC stock. So I'm your broker. You call me and say, Dean, I'd like to sell short 100 shares of ABC. I said, well, Janet, before we do that, I have to make sure we can locate it and that we have a customer who signed a loan consent form. I say, hey, Janet, good news. I found somebody who has 100 shares of ABC in their account, and they did sign the loan consent form, so we can lend it to you. Now, Janet, I notice here that ABC pays $1 dividend. And so that guy who we're taking out of his account expects $100 to go into his account when the dividend gets paid. And, the stock isn't in his account because remember, I'm lending it to you. And so, Janet, one of the disadvantages of shorting a stock with a dividend is you, the borrower, are going to have to pay the lender whatever that dividend is. Because ABC, remember, is giving it to whoever you sold it to. So when you sell that ABC to, whoever, they're getting $100. So I had a client one time where the compliance department wouldn't let him short the stock because of the dividend. And my customer was mad, and I was with him. He said, I don't think they're going to be paying that $1 dividend. I think it's going to stop paying dividends here shortly because they're in trouble. And he was right, by the way, and, he was mad. So, but that's one of the disadvantages of selling a stock short that has a dividend. Right, because you, the borrower, are going to have to pay the lender.
So there's always going to be a deduction in these type of situations where I have to pay a dividend.
That's right.
In the
now,
credit.
remember, that's right. Now, and remember, on the long account, would be the opposite. So if you were owned the security and it paid $100 in dividends, I'd pay down your debit.
So I would add.
Yeah. Well, you would subtract from what you owe the broker. So if you had just let me show you. Let's say you were long this stock. And you were long 100 shares at 15. Let's just say it's $15,000 in long market value, and it's 7,500 in debit register. So you owe the brokerage firm 7,500. If I'm a margin clerk, and any money comes into your account, I pay down that loan. So now, if the $100 comes into your account, you owe the brokerage firm 7,400. Right, because if you owe the brokerage firm money and any money comes into your account, Janet, we're paying down the loan. Right, so in a long account, we pay down the debit. We take that, whatever you owe the brokerage firm. By the way, that means the equity is going to go up, right? Because now you don't owe the brokerage firm anymore 7,500. You owe the brokerage firm 7,400. So your point here, it comes out of the credit, and here it's subtracted from the debit. So it just depends on whether you're long or short. Again, I think pretty esoteric, but All right. So boy, you picked some doozies. So margin on options, let's just talk briefly about option positions. As a margin clerk, I'm not going to lend you money to buy options. If you want to buy options, you're going to have to pay in full. Now, if you actually have an obligation to sell the stock and you actually own it, I'm going to say, well, Janet, as a margin clerk, I'm really not worried about you agreeing to sell stock you own. I'm only worried about you agreeing to sell stock you don't own. And I'm only concerned about an obligation to buy the stock if you don't have a short position in the stock. Because if you have a short position in the stock, Janet, you need to buy back the borrowed stock anyway. So I'm only worried about you as a margin clerk if you have a short call and you don't have the stock, or you have a short put and you don't have a short stock position. So what we're basically saying is that if we are long the stock or we are short the stock always dominates. And we're not, as a margin clerk, going to be worried about, whatever your offsetting position is. In other words, what I'm saying here is that as a margin clerk, I'm not concerned with somebody who has an obligation to sell stock they own. And I'm not worried about somebody who has an obligation to buy stock they're short. So that's kind of the key here. The first thing is kind of get a question here. So you say margin on options. This is your number 3. An investor sells short 200 shares at 58. So we should be getting a little bit better at this. So we sell 200 shares short. At 58. And again, what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and get my calculator and figure what that is, because, I want to be able to I think I'm going to probably need that. So where is my calculator? Here is my calculator, and I'm going to take 200 shares times 58. I find out that's 11,600. Okay. And, before we get too carried away, I know that I'm going to have 50% of that as my Reg T call. And so when I do that,
5,800.
Okay. So that looks like the margin requirement to do that is so far. So let's just label that margin required for the short stock position. Okay, so let's see what's next. It says you sell short. Ooh, oh, there we go. I'm on.
I have a question.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I skipped one here. Let's just go back here. Yeah, go ahead.
My understanding with options was that I had to pay for all of it, but as long as I have an obligation, or I had the option is covered by a put, then I'm able to have it margined at 50%. Other than that, would have to pay 100%, correct?
That's exactly right. When you buy options, none of these questions we're looking at, we're on question number 3. None of these questions are where somebody has bought an option. 0, right? We have a bunch of positions here where people have shorted the option. So if I ask you what's the margin requirement to buy the puts on number 3, that would be $800, right? 2 contracts at 4 points, but you didn't buy them. You sold them, right?
Okay.
So that's the key. So, and all short sales must be conducted at margin except a covered call. So I'm on number 3, and it says we sold short 200 shares at 60. So we should be getting the hang of this a little bit. So we sell short 200 shares at 60.
Mhm.
That's going to be $12,000. And so remember, that's going to be what we get from selling the borrowed stock. And then remember, how much do we have to put with that?
6,000.
Yeah, we're going to have to put up $6,000, right? So half of that is going to be 6,000. As we said, that is the margin requirement for the short stock position. So we really want to do things in kind of a disciplined fashion. What I mean by that is, baby steps. So there's our 6,000 for the stock. Okay, so now it says, this is number 3. You sell 2 ABC January 60 puts. So you've obligated yourself to buy 200 shares at 60. But Janet, that's okay because you have to buy back the borrowed stock, right? So I, as a margin clerk, say, I'm not really worried, Janet, about you having an obligation to buy 200 shares at 60 because you have a short stock position. You're going to need to buy back the borrowed stock anyways. So I have some good news for you. The good news I have for you is I'm not going to ask you to deposit any money for those short puts. Usually, Janet, I would ask you for cash equal to the aggregate exercise price. In other words, what I'd want, Janet, in your account is enough money to pay for the stock. But since you already have the short stock position, it's not going to be an issue. In fact, what I'm going to let you do is I'm going to let you use the $800 to meet your margin requirement. So you need 6,000, and there's already $800 from selling the puts. And so I only need you to send me, Janet, as your margin clerk, 5,200. The margin requirement is 6,000, and the margin call, the difference between what you need and what you've got, is 5,200. So, by the way, I had a customer, he sold 10 240 puts, 10 240 puts. So he's obligated to buy 1,000 shares at 240. Janet, he's not short the stock. So as a margin clerk, his name was Mark. I'm going to say, Mark, I need 240 grand from you. I need cash equal to the aggregate exercise price. So that way, if somebody sticks the stock, you can pay for it. Here I say, Janet, I'm not worried about somebody sticking the stock to you because you can use it to cover your short stock position. So if all you did was the puts, that would be uncovered. And that would be a different conversation. By the way, you picked up some doozies. No, these are not, these aren't your run-of-the-mill kind of questions, right? So this is a covered put. A covered put, what I mean by a covered put is that you actually have the short stock position. That's kind of what's dominating this thing, right? Okay. So that would be this one.
And then we got the 800 from the premium.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's just do that. So we got 4 points on 2 contracts, each governing 100 shares. That's called the multiplier. So indeed.
What would this question look like you stated earlier, and you said you only selected sell positions, so we're able to
I don't think
margin.
they would. So I don't think they would get into it on year 7, but just for your own edification, if you wrote those puts and you didn't have a short stock position, I would either want cash equal to the aggregate exercise price, or I'd want 20% of the market value plus the current premium. I don't think, if you join me for 9 later in your career or 4, I always post not only my videos, but other people's videos on some of my social media. And there's a lady, Susie, who does practice questions, but, I don't post everything. And she had one she did, and it was a 7, and she was showing people how to calculate the margin requirements on naked options. I go, man, people got other things to do. I mean, to pass the test is what I mean. So, I mean, if you come back and say, Dean, when I say these are doozies, I'm telling you that, if you told me you missed your mark because of this kind of a question, I'm gonna say, oh man, I don't know. I mean, You had to have some other problems. So, um, but indeed, but by the way, that's what past perfect is getting at, is this idea here that if you have a stock position, so listen, this is going to be our next one, right? You're not doing a naked call, thank God, because a naked call would be really stupid, right? That was where you sell the calls and you don't have the stock. And that's an entirely different thing, right? Than naked or uncovered calls. So I think that's what they're trying to get in these questions, is recognition that, it's a different deal to be agreeing to sell stock you own or agree to buy stock you're short. That's different than just doing, naked options, right? So neither one of these positions are what we call naked options. All right, so let's look at our next one. That was number 3. By the way, key phraseology too. Again, so this is our practicing thing that we keep talking about. So RTFQ. That stands for read the full question. So if I had asked you the margin requirement, that would have been $6,000. But they didn't ask you the margin requirement. They asked you what you have to deposit, which is the margin call. The margin call is the difference between what you need and what you got. So you need 6,000, but you already have in the account the 800. So that's the margin call, is the difference between what you need and what you got. So be careful at the end of the question where they're saying, what is the margin requirement? Because that answer is 6,000. What is the must deposit? That's the margin call. Now, they didn't call that the margin call, but must deposit is the margin call. Remember this, how many days you have to meet the margin call? T plus 2 plus 2, right? Yeah, to break these, I got to give you 2 additional days. Okay, so let's do our next one. So our next one, wow. So number 4, this is called a mixed margin account. Mixed margin, meaning we got a long situation going on and we got a short situation going on. Okay, so on the same day, a customer buys 100 shares at 58. So, before I do anything, let's just get comfortable with all the different things going on here. So we buy 100 shares at 58. We sell short 200 shares at 48. At 48. And then it says, I sell a 60 call. So I'm going to put that here. It looks like that's going to be okay that I'm selling a call because I have the stock. So it says I sell an ABC 60 call at 3. And then it says I sell 2 ABXYZ, 2 XYZ. Let's see, 2 XYZ, January 45 puts at 6. Okay, so here we go. Woohoo! I wish the questions like you could get like 1 point or 3 points. And if you got a question like this, right, I'd say, man, I got to give you like 5 points. This is a lot of stuff going on. So, but we always want to do it in baby steps. So first thing we want to do is say, okay, we're going to need to buy the stock. That's going to be $5,800. And we need to have 50% of that. And so again, I told you I'm not being facetious. My arithmetic is terrible. So I'm going to take 5,800 times 50%. I get 2,900. So that's going to be the margin requirement for that position. So let's label that. And then I say, well, okay, of the $2,900 you need to do that, you have $300 from the covered call. So on that part of the transaction, you're going to need $2,600. Remember, you don't have any problem with the option. And the reason you don't have any problem with the option is because you actually have the stock. Right? That would be a different deal if you didn't have that stock. Okay, so now we're selling 200 shares at 48. So 200 times 48 is 9,600. And we're going to have to put up 50% of that. And so times 50%, that's 4,800. And let's label that.
Return requirement.
And then I don't have a problem with you selling the puts because you have the short stock position. And or you're going to need to buy back the borrowed stock anyways. And so I say you're going to have $1,200 from that. We got you got 6 points on 2 contracts. And each of these contracts govern 100 shares. So you're going to get $1,200 from that.
3,600.
Is that 3,000? I don't know where you go. Oh yeah, okay, you're ahead of me. So you're quicker on the arithmetic than me. So indeed, so we're going to say, okay, so of the 4,800 you already got in your account from selling the option contracts, you got 1,200, and selling the covered puts, right? So I say you need 4,800, but you got 12 already in there. So on that part, you're going to need 3,600. That's going to be the margin call there. And so you need 2,600 plus 3,600.
Yeah.
So that is going to be
62.
Yep, 6,200. A lot going on that question. Now, listen, I hope, Janet, I don't know where, have you done any practice tests yet?
I started doing some practice tests right now. I'm scoring like a 70%
Okay. So,
with past perfect.
well, that's good. That's good. I mean, they're tough. So that's good. The reason I asked that is I'd like you, when's your test date?
Next week.
Okay. If we can push that into the, higher 70s, maybe low 70, 75, 76, what I'd like to be able to do is have you in a place of abundance where, you can just say, you know what, I'm guessing beyond this one, I'm just going to assign it to the universe. I'll make it up elsewhere, because that is a lot of work for 1 point. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, and I'm not being facetious. I'm thinking, you know what, I'm not so sure I want to get into the nitty gritty with this question. So I don't believe in.
I'm trying to find like right now the opportunity that I have is that some of these questions are taking too much of my time.
Yeah.
Where it's cutting my time towards
the
end.
I when people are at risk with a 70, I don't think you're at risk with past perfect. But where I find people are at risk is they just get into the weeds and they never can get out. Based on what we're just talking about, whether it's margin or something else. And so that is the downside. I don't think anybody scoring 70 on past perfect is at risk, but there are some people that just never can get to the 70 because there's so much of this junk, this stuff, right?
Which but I like how you set this up.
Yeah, right, well, that's part of what we're practicing, right? So we're practicing getting more comfortable with a setup, because what happens a lot of times, I don't think as your tutor that you seem to have some base knowledge, which is great. I don't like when people sign up with tutoring, they haven't, put in enough work to kind of know what they want to see, or talk about. But what I was going to say is, some people just stare at these and just go B. You got, before you do that, you kind of got to say, okay, well, I got to attack somehow, some way. What am I going to do? I call it, again, please note, I call it the setup. So, you got to, in your own mind, as an attack plan, say, okay, I'm going to have to do some kind of a setup to kind of, don't buy into the question setup. What I mean by that, don't buy into you got to buy what they've done here. Again, just past perfect being jerks here. You notice they didn't, this is just, again, I expect no less from them, to be honest with you, but they didn't organize this for you, right? They put the option contracts different to away from the stock positions. So, that's something that, and I think they did it intentionally. I mean, like I say, that's who they are, so, I mean, We don't expect them not to be who they are, but but good news, like I say, good news if you can hang with a 70, that's pretty damn good, particularly on a pass perfect. All right, so now it looks like we're out of the margin stuff. And again, here's another one. I don't think they're going to make you have to do yield to call. But let's just talk about number 5, and I'll show you how to do what's called the rule of thumb. I'm first going to attempt to do a shortcut on number 5, and I may or may not be able to do the shortcut. So an 8% corporate bond with 20 years left to maturity is trading at 120. So the first thing I'm going to attempt is a shortcut. And the shortcut I'm going to attempt is based on using what's called the teeter-totter or the seesaw. And so they tell me in this question that it's trading at a premium. And they tell me that the premium is 120. Wow. So 1,200. And so this is definitely a bond at a premium. And it tells me that the nominal yield, the fixed or stated rate of return, the coupon is 8%. So I'm going to put that into my little teeter-totter because I'm attempting a shortcut. The thing I like about the teeter-totter is the teeter-totter or seesaw turns, judgment questions and aim and shoot, point and click questions. Anytime I can do that, I am a big fan. So that's going to be the nominal yield. And then the teeter-totter is a way of showing the relationships of yields and bond prices. And so based on this, we should know that interest rates have gone down, causing the bond to go up. And that's, the inverse relationship of interest rates and bond prices. Inverse relationship, let's put that there. And so when interest rates go down, the bond price goes up. This is price over here. Now, one thing I should be able to do is I should be able to crunch the current yield. That is definitely testable. So I take 80 and I divide by what it costs me, what it pays me divided by what it costs me. And based on this teeter-totter, I know it's going to be something less than 8. So I'm going to, do you see how I got the 80 bucks, by the way? The 80 is at 8%. 6 point, what'd you say?
6.6.
Okay, so let's put that here. So now what I would have done, you didn't give me the answer set here. But what I would have done is I would have shopped my answer set and looked for a number that's less than 6.6. And so hopefully there's only one that's less than 6.6. I haven't had anybody on debrief ever tell me they had to crunch yield to maturity or yield to call. What you do get tested on is knowing, very testable, that this is the lowest yield you're going to expect and you're likely to get it. So this is a corporate bond, but boy, you're not going to be able to hold this to maturity. It looks like when the issuer can call this, they're going to do so. Right? Now, by the way, to answer your original question, if I wanted to actually do this, I would take the $200 and divide by how long until it gets called. So the bond is called on 4 years at 104. Wow. So that means we would lose $160. Right. So let's just put that up here. So it says it's callable at 104. So this is not bueno. You paid $1,200 for a bond that can be called away in 4 years at 104. So that means you would be losing, if that happens, you'd be losing $160 over 4 years. Are we clear how I'm getting that $160? I'm taking what you paid and what is callable, right? So if I take my calculator and I take 160 and I divide by 4 years, you're going to lose $40 a year if this bond gets called. If you have to do this, by the way, I think it would not be a corporate bond. It would be a muni bond. And when you buy a muni bond at a premium, you have to do straight line amortization downward called decretion. That's kind of what I'm doing here. But, I don't think you're going to have to do that. So now it says, if the client buys the bond and the issuer calls in 4 years, the yield to call would be. So again, I don't think you're going to have to do this. But I say, okay, well, we're getting $80 from the coupon, but we're losing $40 by holding this bond to maturity each year. So what we're actually getting in adjusted interest is $40. So what I just did there was I took, let me put this over somewhere we can, I said, okay, we're getting $80 in annual interest. However, we're losing $40 each year there to the call date. Right. So that's what we're actually getting in adjusted interest. We paid 1,200. We're getting back 1,040. And so what I'm going to do here is get the average cost of the bond. And so 1,200, it's callable 104 plus 1,040. Divide by 2. Get the average cost of the bond. That's 1,120. And then I'm not sure Past Perfect asking you to do this, but then to get the yield to call, I would simply take, okay, well, we get $40 in adjusted interest. Let me get a different color.
3.57.
Yeah, so 40 divided by 1,120. What'd you get?
3.57.
Let's just make sure we agree. Yep. 3.57, 3.6. Now listen, if 3.6 is a good deal, maybe you still want to buy the bond. I don't know. I mean, that's, in today's environment, that's the whole point of this, by the way. So we just did the math. I don't think you'd have to do the math. I think we could have just shopped our answer set.
Mm-hmm.
And, it would have been something less. By the way, here's the kind of question I think if I told you the yield to call, I'm telling you the yield to call is 3.7 and the current yield is 6.6. What is the yield to maturity? It's some number between those two, right?
Yeah.
So it's mainly the relationship of these yields, not can you actually crunch it. Now, that being said, you do have to be able to do current yield for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Did they ask you to actually crunch that, come up with 3.6? Is that what Past Perfect asked you to do?
Yes.
Man,
They did. They
that's
also had
crazy.
several problems on yield to maturity, which is the same equation here.
Yeah.
Just depending if you're doing a discount or a premium,
Yeah.
where a discount you would add.
Yeah. It's by the way, the thing I hate about it is first, you're not going to have to do it on the test, but it's called the rule of thumb. We actually didn't even get the real number because we're using a simple function calculator. So what we just did is called the rule of thumb approximation, which,
Yeah.
and then, the other thing, we have a bond desk who does that, but this relationship is very testable to know where these yields are in relationship, boy. So like I said, you pick some doozies. You pick some doozies for sure. All right. So that was number 5. Number 6. Which of the following statements are true regarding the effect of interest rates movements on callable and puttable bonds? So let's just, again, put that up here. So a call feature is advantageous to the issuer.
Mhm.
All right. What it allows the issuer to do is to refinance at a lower rate. And so, if I call you as a broker and I'm trying to sell you a bond, you say, well, Dean, this bond seems to be pretty attractive. It seems like it has a lower price and a higher yield than other bonds I've been looking at. I said, well, Janet, the reason for that is it has a call feature. You may not be able to hold this to maturity. So one of the risks, very testable, you get tested on, is called call risk. And call risk is associated with a declining interest rate environment. And that bond we just looked at, it's very likely that the issuer may call that bond. Because, it's at 1,200, it's callable 104, and it pays 8%. They're like, let's call that bond. Now, what prevents the issuer from calling the bond is call protection. And you say, well, Dean, I might still consider buying that bond, even though it's callable. I mean, what is the yield to call? What is the call protection? The call protection consists of 2 things: the time and the price. In our last bond, it was callable in 4 years at 104. So I say, well, they're not going to call it for at least 4 years. And if they do, they're going to give us 104. And so this would be something you'd be worried about in a declining interest rate environment. So puttable is the opposite.
And when they say they have a ceiling on the callable, the ceiling is that 104.
Yeah. So,
Is that correct?
yeah. So remember that this teeter totter only goes so far, right? So your point, that's the ceiling. This on the teeter totter, this only goes so far up before the bond is called. So that's what they mean by that ceiling. The ceiling is the idea that, you're not going to make an unlimited sum of money in bonds if interest rates go your way, because what happens is the bond gets called from you. So that's what we're trying to say by ceiling. The floor is 0 and the ceiling is when the bond gets called. Now, so by the way, I think that's not a bad idea, the way to think about it. So here we have a ceiling. So if I just told you, that's what sometimes what I like about tutoring is because we come up with different ways to say things. And if that's true, then that means I'm going to share here with you a floor. Right? If I just said that this is the opposite. So the put feature is the opposite. So you say, Dean, I'm a little leery of buying that bond from you. It has a higher price and, a lower yield than other bonds I've been looking at. And I'm afraid that interest rates are going to go up. I said, well, I'm not surprised that the bond I'm offering you has a higher price and a lower yield, because the nifty thing about this bond is that after 5 years, you can put it back to the issuer. So a put provision is advantageous to the bond holder in a rising interest rate environment. So, here, since this is an advantageous to the issuer, the call feature, we would have to expect this bond to have a lower price to the investor and a higher yield. Because again, you're taking the risk that you're not going to get to hold it to maturity. And since this is an advantageous to the bondholder, this would have a higher price because it's a neat thing to be able to put it back to the issuer, and a lower yield. It's all about trading that off. So, and we said here, puts are going to be advantageous in a rising interest rate environment. So that would be the question there. So it says your 6 is, which of the following statements are true regarding the effect of market interest rate movement on callable and puttable bonds? Well, the ceiling would be about the call, and the floor would be about the put. So I don't see your answer set you were offered here, but that would be what you'd be looking for. So if you were asked, about the ceiling, then they're most definitely getting at this idea that you're not going to participate, right? In that bond we just were looking at, the previous one at 104 gets called. So you say, hey, Dean, what's going to happen? I said, well, the worst case is you either get to hold the bond to maturity, or, you get to hold the bond to the call. And he said, well, geez, Dean, if interest rates go down, my bond price goes up. I go, yeah, but Janet, it's only going to go up so far. I mean, the one we just looked at, it was 1,200. I don't know how much further up it can go, right? I'm joking, but we just looked at it at 3.7 yield to call. So if it goes to 1,500, nobody's going to buy it. They're going to say, my yield to call is 0. So that's what we mean by that ceiling.
And do most bonds have the puttable feature, or is that like a covenant?
Yeah, no, that's a unique thing. Not that would be something you wouldn't expect unless you were told differently. So all bonds, except for 0 coupon bonds and treasuries, are callable. Puttable is a feature that's either added by the issuer or by the bond desk. So that's a little more unique than a call feature. So again, I'll play broker. You say, well, Dean, the bond you're offering me has a higher price and a lower yield than other bonds I've been looking at. I said, well, yeah, Jen, but I bet the other bonds you were looking at didn't have a put provision. There's no free lunch, my friend. It's pretty nifty that after 5 years, if we want, we can put it back to the issuer. Now, usually it's interest rates, but it also could be like a downgrade in credit. I say, hey, Janet, if they go to BBB, the bonds become puttable, and you can say, I'm out of here. You don't have to stick around and wait if you don't want to, right? So, yeah, so this is, the words they love on the test, we'll call this typical. And that's kind of our expectation. That's going to be, something that is in most bonds. And then this is more a little bit unusual. They wouldn't use that phrase always on the test, but we wouldn't expect that. Again, we wouldn't be bringing stuff into questions unless, they do it. Don't, use your own brain. Okay. So your next one, a customer has purchased a 20-year corporate bond with a 5% coupon at par. So I don't know if we're going to need our teeter-totter again, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put it because, so what? So I make a teeter-totter. Flat line, remember, represents a bond at par. And I may or may not need this teeter-totter, but they just told me that we bought this bond at par. Now I reversed engineered the par. You see how Dean got that this was par? The way I got this was par is because they told me that it's purchased to 20-year with a 5% coupon at par. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is put 5% here. Because remember, that's kind of my fulcrum of my teeter-totter. That's what makes the teeter-totter kind of go up and down. Right. And then over here, I'm going to put interest rates. Okay. So this is going to be the nominal yield. This is going to be the current yield, yield to maturity, yield to call. Okay, so the bond is called 10 years at 103. The customer intends to hold the bond to maturity. If interest rates rise, so when interest rates go up, bond prices go
down.
So we now know this bond is going to be trading at a discount. Or what that's called? The inverse relationship of bond prices and interest rates, right? So now the relationship is going to look like this. Assuming that you do something in the secondary market, we're not quite sure yet what's going on. So let's see what's going on next. If market rates rise to 7%, which of the following statements is true? Yeah, well, are we just less than par as discount, right? So I call you up and you say, hey, Dean, I bought the bond at par and now I see it's less than par. Why is it trading at a discount? And I say, well, remember when we bought the bond, Janet, interest rates were 5%, but now you can get brand new bonds that pay 7%. And that makes your bond that pays 5% worth less. Your bond is worth less because brand new bonds pay 7% and yours only pays 5%. However, I wouldn't worry about it, my friend, because that's only going to be a loss if you decide to sell the bond. I wouldn't sell your bond. Let's just hold it to
Maturity.
But in terms of your statement, you're getting a statement how often? Very testable. Quarterly, right? So I say, hey, Janet, every quarter, if interest rates, we're in a rising interest rate environment right now, Janet. So every quarter, when you look at your bond prices, they're going to be lower because, the Fed keeps raising interest rates. And so the bonds in your portfolio are less valuable. Now, remember, we didn't buy them to sell them. We were holding them to maturity. Okay, so that's that one. 8. Man, I'll tell you, like I say, these questions are, I think you've had a couple. That, by the way, this one was pretty, straightforward. But you haven't had many that are just, aim and shoot, point and click. Most of the ones you've had are doozies. So let's look at this next doozy. So what I mean by here is a doozy. They ask you to go through 4 option positions to find the profit. So this is another one where hopefully we can push you into like the 75 range so that again, you can say, you know what? B, what's it to universe and move on. But, all right. So, when you get a question like this, I think the first thing
I'm
to
just
do.
trying to see, like, with those, is there a way that I could easily look at it without?
I don't know. So
calculating?
we're always looking for a cheat or a hack if we can. Right? So the first thing I'm going to do is, you just got to take a deep breath and say, okay. So I'm certainly going to put the 50 somewhere in my scratch paper. So that, as I go through these and try and do some kind of a shortcut I can. So if market price is 50, which of the following positions would be profitable? So A, we look at A, and A, let's talk about it, is a straddle. Are you clear that that's a straddle A? I don't know, does,
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
okay, so I'll read it to you. But does this look familiar? Do you use a matrix or not? I don't want to introduce things that you're not using in your study effort. But does that look familiar? The options matrix?
Yes, I use,
Okay.
I have
So-
like my little
Okay.
sheet.
So
matrix.
it says if ABC is at 50, which of the following positions were profitable? And it says we're long a 60 call and we are long a 60 put. And
Mhm.
it says
So that's
we're long the
long
60
straddle.
put. So yeah, this is a straddle, right? And we have to be able to
Mhm.
identify straddles. That's testable. No, this is a straddle. I think this would be separate issues on the test, but there's our straddle. And we're going to get our break evens by combining the premiums. The premiums here are 10, and we're going to get an upside break even of 60, and we're going to get a downside break even of 50. And so for a long straddle to be profitable, we would need it to be either above 60 or below 50. And so we can eliminate choice A.
In the middle.
Yeah, because 50 is not profitable in this long straddle. You got to be at 49 or 48. So A is out. So what we're doing here is process of elimination. Process of elimination.
Okay.
I'll leave the matrix. I'll leave the matrix up there. B says that we are short a 60 call at 5. And we are short a 60 put at 5. So that is a short straddle. A short straddle, right? And so a short straddle, it's going to be, again, the same break evens, but we don't need to break even. We need to make money. So at 50, it was, here's our break even is the 60 plus 10 and 60 minus 10. And so we're going to have an upside break even of 70 and a downside break even of 50. And it says 50. 50 isn't where we make money. That's when we break even. So that's out. Okay, our next one says we're long a 50 call at 5 and long a 50 put. So again, what it looks like is they're giving us a series of straddles here.
Yeah.
And
Let me get my charger. Sorry. I'll be right back.
No worries. No worries.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay. So choice C is long a 50 call at 5 and long a 50 put at 5. So again, break evens for that are going to be 60 and 50. And remember, we're trying to make money. So break even doesn't float our boat. We got to have something that makes money here, right? So and with the market price at 50, which of the following positions would be profitable? And so far, we have found that all of these are the break evens. And so let's see, I'm just looking here, 50, 60, we got 60, 70, 50, 50, 50. Here we go. So our choice C is a 50 call and a 50 put at 5. So this is choice C, a 50 call at 5 and a 50 put at 5. So that means it's a long straddle. That's a long straddle, and our break even is going to be 60 and 40. And they're saying the stock is at 50, so that doesn't work. And then our last choice is the same version of this, but it's short. And if we're short and it's 50, that's going to be good news, right? Because a short straddle would be profitable. So the answer here is D, because it's a short straddle and the break evens are 40 and 60. A lot of work, man, for 1 point, but man, some part of me says, man, maybe I should put those questions on my practice exams, something crazy.
You could take
know,
them.
I mean, it's crazy. All right, so here's our next one. This is number 9. So again, so I don't know how you do options, but I like to use a T. I like to track money in and out. And some people like to use pluses or minus, whatever floats your boat. So I'm going to use dollars out. But, if you want, you could use debit. You could use a minus sign, whatever you want to be able to track the money. I like to use dollars out, dollars in. And then I like to use dollars in, but again, you could use a credit if you want. You can use a plus if you want. What you want to be able to do is track the money and know the contract specifications. And so contract specifications here is we're buying 100 shares at 58. If we buy 100 shares at 58, is that money out or money in if we buy 100 shares at 58?
That's money out.
That is money out indeed. And then it says we buy an ABC 55 put at 2.5. Is that money out or money in if we buy a put?
That's a choice to sell.
Yeah, but it's still going to
So-
cost us money. You're exactly right. That's a choice to sell, but it's still going to cost us money, right? To have a choice to
So-
sell the stock, you need to pay a premium. So here you paid 58 for the stock and you paid 2.5 points for the protection. So 58 for the stock, and then you paid 2.5 points for the protection. It's like buying insurance, right?
Yeah.
In fact, let's just put the position here so we can look at the position as we're talking about this. So here it says you bought 100 shares. Let me get a smaller font. It says you buy 100 shares at 58 and buy 1 ABC July 55 put at 2.5. Now, what I like to do, what Dean likes to do is not testable. But what I like to do is underneath my option leg, say, what am I looking at? Your point, you're correct. This is a choice to sell the stock at the strike price. And that still costs me some money. XP means strike price. So this is the one time and the one time only that we have a put, and we're not subtracting to get the break even. And the reason we're not subtracting to get the break even is because this is not an option position. This is a stock position. And so what you're out for this position is 60.5, 58 for the stock and 2.5 points for the protection. So that's what you're going to be out. And that is going to be your break even. This is the one time and the one time only we have a put and we aren't subtracting to get the break even. The reason we're not subtracting is because this is not an option position. This is a stock position.
So with all stock positions, you would do the opposite with the put or the call.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. I told you that's why you got to give yourself credit, as your tutor. So the things you're just need to fine tune a little bit. And every time you do your correction, your self-correction, you're on, right? So the covered call will be the same, right? You'd net it. So it's only when you have the stock that it gets a little different. Okay, so now the question, that's called, again, so our big takeaway from today's session, the setup, right? We don't do nothing until we get the setup. So now we have our setup. Now we go back and we say, okay, what do they want to know? So it says the maximum potential gain is. Well, you don't do this because of the gain, but the gain is still unlimited because you don't have to sell the stock if you don't want to. You didn't do this for the maximum gain. You did this for the maximum loss. But you can sell this anytime you want. So you have unlimited gain potential because you're not going to stick the stock to somebody at 55, but the stock is 90 or 100. The more likely test question, by the way, is that you're a very smart person because anytime you want, it wasn't the test question here, but the most you can lose is the break even of the strike because anytime you want, you can exercise and sell the stock at 55. And so you're really doing this for protection. You're not doing this for max gain potential purposes. You're doing this because you want to protect that stock position. That's more likely the test question. Here they asked you, what's the maximum gain, which is unlimited. Maximum loss would be break even to the strike. So that's a nifty thing. You put in a floor at 55. By the way, I told you, as a smart person, you have ability to participate in a big price increase, but not participate in a big price decline. So number 10, I always tell people, pay attention to my language here. I think a lot of people are loose with language. So how long do I have to hold a stock to qualify for a long-term capital gain?
More than a year.
Let me rephrase that for you. You have to be at risk for more than a year. So not holding it for a year, at risk for a year. So in this situation, when we bought this put, we were no longer at risk, because we're no longer at risk here, because anytime we want, we can stick it to somebody at 55. So if you own the stock and you buy that protection, you have interrupted the holding period. You've interrupted the holding period because you're no longer at risk, right? So let's play, again, you play client, I'll play broker.
Okay.
You're my doctor client. True story. Doctors drive me nuts. They think they know everything about everything, right? So anyways, I called the doctor. I said, doctor, we got really lucky. We bought the stock at 90 and now the stock is 180, and boy, we are looking good. I say, you know what I think? Alexa's messing up on me. I say, hey, doctor, I'm looking at the 175 puts right now, and they're really cheap because the stock is roaring. Why don't we buy a 175 put? 4 points. We're out 90 for the stock. We're out 4 points for the protection. Anytime between now and expiration, we can stick it to somebody at 90. You'd have a guaranteed profit. You'd have the ability to participate in a big price increase, but not participate in a big price decline. He said, well, Dean, that's wonderful. I said, well, now, doctor, just one more thing here. We've only held the stock for 6 months. And when I buy the put, we're going to interrupt the holding period. We're going to have to start fresh on the 12 months because we're no longer at risk, right? So it's buying the put that could interrupt the holding period. So that's your last question. It says, which of the one can affect the holding period of a stock held short term? It's buying the put. Because when you buy the protection, you're no longer at risk. All right. Wow. That was fun. We got everything on the punch list done. As your tutor,
Thank you.
I think the big takeaway is initial setup. Got to do an initial setup. So you want to, practice, getting the question and saying, okay, what's going to be my setup? Am I going to make a T? Am I going to do, mark to market? What am I going to do in terms of attacking this question? If you are, have more questions, you can just send them to me. You don't need book tutoring. If you run into a couple like this, we can set up another Zoom session without a charge. But if you want to do another tutoring session, that's cool too. But, it's not a transaction, it's a relationship. So make sure you stay in touch. You didn't have any, I guess, good news. You said you're getting a 70 on Past Perfect. That's good news. And the other good news, I guess, is that you only wanted to go over hard stuff. You didn't you didn't have any easy ones here. So I don't know, that makes you feel better, but it's not like I'm talking to you backstage, but it's not like I'm looking at this and going, oh man, this person is really clueless. You said this to me, I go, oh man, God, this is some hard stuff. So.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I still have, after this, I still have the 66 and the 9 and the 10.
Oh
So
my
you'll be
God, you're
hearing
already going
from
to be a
me
sales supervisor? Oh my God. Well, I guess what I would tell you is that just makes the sweat equity investment even better for dividends, right? Because when I teach 9 and 10, a lot of those men and women have been years since they took a 7. And, I get it. You take the test and you forget everything. So hopefully when you do your data dump on your 7 and you're you pass your 66, you don't forget everything. Some people do, I get it, but hopefully there's some residual knowledge there still. And once you're in the registration
Yes,
mode,
yeah,
just keep rolling, right? So, if you get
yes,
another testing victory, I'm assuming you were victorious on your SIE already, right?
yes, that's
So that
done
would be your,
and
you go
complete.
for your, 2-0 and then 3-0. And then I had somebody today who passed their 10, and I thought it was weird because they did their 10 before their 9. I don't know why. And they said their company made them do it that way. I'm like, sometimes you wonder who comes up with, like, if it were me, I'd say do it any order
The
you
rules,
like, whatever speaks to you.
yeah.
So wow, that's exciting. Are you coming from a different field? I mean, that's kind of odd to be doing, where you were a banker or something, and now you're going to be in charge on the broker dealer side or something.
Oh, yeah, I was a market leader in the consumer side of the business.
Uh,
And I used to hold licenses. I used to have my 6 and 63 and my life and health in
yeah,
the past. So
yeah.
there's some history there. And so I'm going to be a market leader for the financial advisors for Merrill.
Wow, that's crazy. That's good. Well, that's
So,
exciting. That's exciting. We used to make you wait 2 years to
so I'm
get a 9 or a
excited.
10. So, I'm dating myself, but in the old days, you couldn't take a 9 or a 10 until you had a 7 for 2 years. And obviously, firms need human capital. They need it now. So, so, well, that's exciting. I'm excited for you to go. Why not? Because
Thank you.
what happens is the people, as I said, you get promoted later on, and then you got to confront the exams again. So sometimes it's better just to get it all done, so you can get on with what you want to do and what they want you to do, and put all this registration stuff behind you. But boy, that's exciting. So we'll say we
Yeah.
knew you win. We knew you win, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're
And we'll be
welcome. You're
talking
welcome. And
again.
like I say, that passed perfect. I particularly Merrill, they've convinced, I think, Merrill, that it's productive to make you struggle on the stuff we just went over. So like I say, it
Yeah.
makes me feel like maybe I should tweak up my stuff and make it tougher. So all right. Well, have a good day. You know where to find
Well,
me if you need
thank
me.
you. You
Okay.
too.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.